webinar, The Assertive Leader. Happy September, everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful summer. It probably went by too quickly. Yep. And you're now back into the frenzy, sort of the back-to-school frenzy or back-to-work frenzy. So I appreciate you all being here today. We're going to spend the next hour and a bit on the topic of becoming more assertive or being a more assertive leader. And there's research, quite a bit of research, to show that a leader's degree of assertion is directly related to their team members' perception of whether they're a good leader or not. So the more that we as leaders can demonstrate assertion and lead with assertion, the more others view us as effective leaders and have trust and faith in our ability to lead. And so this is a very important topic because of it's not only of when we are able to act and demonstrate assertion that increases our level of confidence and reduces our level of stress, but also has a direct impact on our ability to develop others, lead others towards achieving results, and creating stronger teams. So it's a very important topic. And so just want to spend a minute just up front in getting a sense of how you would define assertiveness. So when you think of an assertive leader, what characteristics or behaviors come to mind when you think of an assertive leader?
I think of someone that is capable of making decisions like pretty well right away, not sitting on something and maybe this or that, and being firm.
Okay, good. Being firm. Yes, and making decisions, right? And being firm on those decisions and not wavering.
Yep. Also being consistent, I think.
Good. Being consistent in their approach? Or being consistent in what way, Menel?
Being consistent and, like, let's see, with decisions. Like, you can't say something to one employee and then say something differently to another. So I think that shows that you're assertive and you're consistent in your decision making, or in the way you're leading.
Okay, good. Any other characteristics of an assertive leader? Okay, we're going to get into a lot more of them as we go through the session today, and you're absolutely touching on some of the key pieces. Decision making is a big piece of demonstrating your assertiveness, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Being firm, and sometimes being firm is all about our tone and our body language and the way in which we communicate a decision, for example, or provide feedback. And it's a fine balance between being firm and also showing empathy and compassion and understanding and creating dialogue. So we're going to be talking about some of these things as we move through today. Getting back to why assertion or being assertive is so important, there was a research study with a large group of leaders to really correlate the impact of being assertive on people's perceptions of them as leaders. And so these were the results. Leaders who rated high as having good judgment but lower on assertiveness had only a 4.2% chance of being highly rated as an effective leader. So maybe they were demonstrating good judgment and they were making good decisions, but weren't leading assertively. They were still not being considered a highly effective leader because the way in which they presented themselves, the way in which they communicated, maybe the way in which they communicated those decisions and made those decisions impacted people's perceptions of them as a leader. Leaders who ranked high on assertiveness but lower on good judgment had a 12.5% chance. So people may think that you don't have as great judgment, but if you're presenting yourself as though you think you do have good judgment and you're communicating with confidence and assertiveness, then you are perceived to have a slightly better, to be slightly better leader. But those leaders who ranked high in both as being assertive and having good judgment had 71% chance of being rated as one of the best leaders. So leading assertively is key. And assertion is all about how we present ourselves, how we speak up, how we ask questions, how we provide feedback and deal with conflict. So there are a lot of aspects of being assertive that we're going to be looking at today. And you're going to have an opportunity to take an assertiveness quiz to get a bit of a sense of how comfortable you feel in being assertive.
Nicole, can I just say, I find that sometimes assertive is also seen as being aggressive.
Good point, Manon. We're going to talk about the difference between aggression and assertion, because there is a very big difference there, and a lot of it comes from our body language and tone of voice, and a lot of it comes from the lack of creating dialogue. Okay, so we'll talk about we're going to talk about the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. Okay, so good point. So when we communicate assertively, okay, we can more effectively communicate our ideas, concerns, and wishes, because when we communicate assertively, and we're going to talk about what that looks like in a minute, people will be more likely to hear us and respect our opinions and will more likely come on side with us, versus if we're communicating passively or aggressively. And we're going to talk about the difference between those. When we communicate assertively, we also gain more clarity about what is expected. So when we communicate assertively, when we feel comfortable asking questions, we're being assertive, right? If we ask for clarity or ask for feedback, we're going to have a better understanding of situations. And in order to speak up and ask questions, we need to feel confident doing that, and that requires assertion to actually speak up and ask questions or ask clarity, okay? When we are assertive, we're going to develop more effective teams, and we're going to look at a strategy to do that and how that leads to being more assertive. When we are assertive, we're going to provide more effective feedback. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to take greater control of our workload. We're going to gain greater respect from others. And also being assertive, at the end of the day, being assertive is also about asking for what you need from others, clarifying your expectations of others and your needs, and saying no when appropriate, and explaining why you might not be able to do something right away because it's just not in your best interest at the moment. And so feeling comfortable voicing your needs is at the heart of being assertive. And the way in which you express those, there's a difference between expressing them passively, expressing them assertively, and expressing them aggressively. And we're going to look at that difference. Okay, so our agenda for today, we're going to look at the importance of being focused on your team's priorities and how that supports your ability to be assertive. We're going to look at the 3 styles of communication: passive, assertive, and aggressive. And those also speak to some things that you learned in the last leadership session, which we're going to review, the in-person leadership session in the spring that I know, Sylvie, I don't believe you were there, but we're going to review a piece of it, which is the parent-adult-child model. And that really speaks to the difference between passive, aggressive, and assertive. And we're going to review that again today. Then we're going to define assertion a little bit more clearly, and you're going to have the opportunity to assess your own assertiveness. And then we'll look at some tips and strategies for leading with assertion. Okay, any questions right now?
Nope.
Okay. So in a couple of the past emails, about a month ago, there was an email around being focused, fanatically focused on your team's priorities and communicating them. And then last week's email, there was a request, if you had the time, and I know it's a very busy time of year, to give some thought to what your team's #1 priority is, to give some thought to, if you only had one message to communicate to your team, what would it be? Also to identify how you will more effectively communicate this message to your team. So those first 3 questions, what's your team's priority? What is the one message that you should be communicating to your team? And how will you more effectively communicate this to your team? Has anybody had the opportunity to do those 3 questions? Okay, so that's okay. I know it's a busy time. I want to then move into a conversation then. How does knowing what your team's main priority and main goal is, and knowing what the one message you should be consistently communicating to your team is, how does knowing those first 2 things help you to be more assertive?
Well, I guess you're confident knowing what you're working towards.
Absolutely, and how does that help you to be more assertive, or to be perceived as more assertive?
Well, if you want to work towards your goals, you'll try and make them happen, so you'll be more assertive with your decision making to get that goal over and done with, accomplished, I guess.
Okay, good. Absolutely. So when you know your team's main priority or your team's goal and keep that top of mind, it's easier to make firm decisions, because every decision that you make should be able to correlate back to, ultimately your team's main goals and main priorities. And so when you're communicating the goals or the decisions back to your team, when you relate them from the perspective of how this helps us to achieve these goals and how this decision is aligned to these goals, you're communicating more assertively around why this decision is the best decision. And when you are communicating and bringing your team back to our main goals, and we talked about this in the leadership session, it enables your team to keep those goals top of mind and to make better decisions on their own. So you're also building more accountability within the team. Now, if you only had, I'd like you to think about this for a minute. If you only had one message to communicate to your team, right now, given what's going on in each of your teams right now, think about that for a minute. I don't need to know the exact words, but what would your message be about, do you think, right now? Think about that for a minute. If you only had one message to communicate to your team, what would it be?
Teamwork.
Yeah.
Teamwork?
Sure.
Yeah.
Own your job.
Own your job.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ownership.
good. Ownership. Okay, good. So keep those, sorry?
When I say teamwork, it's not just within like one department. I mean, teamwork as a whole, the whole organization. I think people don't work well within, like one department with the other, and they have to understand everybody has a job to do, and they need to all work together.
Okay, good. Okay, so I want you to keep those things in mind, because we're going to come back to them with an activity down the road later on in the session and relate it back to assertiveness. So I heard ownership, accountability, teamwork, not just within the team, but across teams, across the organization. So we're going to look at how you can lead more assertively to achieve those goals and gaining a strategy to achieve those down the road. Okay?
Yep.
Knowing what your main goal is. So your main message at this moment sort of relates or does relate to one of your priorities for your team and for your organization. And I've heard 2 priorities just now. Priorities of creating greater ownership and accountability, and priority around creating greater teamwork. And so for those 2, when you lead with assertion, those are always top of mind, and you're looking for ways to strengthen those 2. And you're taking the lead as the leader in actively developing those. So that's what we're going to look at a little bit later. Okay. So let's start with the 3 styles of communication, the difference between passive, aggressive, and assertive. So when you think of passive, whether it's passive communication or passive leadership, and I want to touch on both, what comes to mind? What behaviors and characteristics come to mind?
You don't address the problem, so you let it pass.
Right. You don't address the problem. So we sort of sweep it under the rug. What else?
Not saying no.
Yep, not saying no, absolutely.
Not being actively involved with your team.
Yes, not being actively involved.
Being too lenient.
Mm-hmm. Too lenient. How about the way in which you communicate when someone's communicating passively? How do they sound? What are they saying? How do you know when someone's communicating passively?
Maybe negative.
Okay, yeah, there's negativity. There's
They
also
are not clear.
Not clear.
They are not clear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe, could be, should, instead of I want this.
Right, right. So they're not speaking with confidence and using I statements. I believe this. I want this. It's more, well, maybe if we did this, or maybe this could happen. Yeah.
Lack of interest in the subject, or
good. Yeah, showing a lack of interest. Absolutely. So, yep. Sorry, Stephen?
No confidence.
Yes, no confidence. Right, and that comes through in not having confidence to say no, or not having confidence for speaking with authority or with assertion. Not having confidence for speaking up and voicing opinion, right? So passiveness comes through when we feel differently than other people, but we're not speaking up and saying it, or we don't ask questions. Okay, so there are a number of behaviors. Here are just a few. You mentioned a number of them, right? So the basic foundation for passive, when we behave in the passive sort of trait, it's an underlying belief of you're okay, I'm not okay. Your beliefs and your needs and your opinions way more are of more value than mine, and so I'm just not going to speak up. I'm not going to say no. I'll just go along with you. I'm not going to rock the boat. I feel that if I speak up, I'll rock the boat, and I don't want to rock the boat. I want to make everybody else happy first, is sort of the underlying belief of a more passive individual. Okay? So a passive individual tends to give in to other people's wishes while forgetting their own needs and wants, has a difficult time saying no, has a hard time making decisions. So why do you think somebody who is more passive has a hard time making decisions?
Because they want to please everyone?
That's right. That's right. They want to please everybody, right? And so oftentimes individuals who take a more passive approach make decisions that are perhaps will be maybe more popular, but not necessarily in the best interest of the organization or at the team at the end of the day. A passive individual, as Stephen said, right, avoids confrontation, avoids problems, and often speaks, when they speak, might speak more softly, sounds unsure in their tone of voice, doesn't speak with confidence and assertion. And they are often overly agreeable, right? They won't speak up and voice an opinion that is different than others because they don't want to rock the boat or might feel uncomfortable or want to be liked. And so it's often difficult to understand where they really stand on a position. And from a leadership perspective, how does this impact, when we lead from this perspective, how does this impact a team? How does this impact our team at the end of the day if we're leading more often from the passive approach than an assertive approach?
Well, things might not move as quickly as they should.
Okay, things might not move as quickly. Yeah.
The problems will build up if they are not settled.
Good. Problems will build up. Absolutely.
You won't be seen with respect by your team members?
Okay, good. You won't be seen, absolutely, but you won't gain the respect of your team members. Okay. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Manon mentioned earlier, around being consistent with decisions and the capability of making decisions right away and being firm. If we think about what it takes to build trust, okay? When we have a foundation of trust, then we will more likely build respect. And from a leader's perspective, in order to build trust, we first, need to demonstrate that we are capable, highly capable of leading others and doing our job well. And part of doing our job well as leaders is making decisions that are in the best interest of the organization, right? Part of leading, showing that we're doing a good job as a leader, is speaking up and voicing opinions, right? In an open way, not in a very aggressive way or domineering way, which we're going to talk about, and showing that we're comfortable and have the confidence to have conversations about differing points of view that may be uncomfortable and may create conflict, but we have the confidence in having those conversations. So it goes directly to building trust, right? And showing others that it's okay to ask for what you need and speak up. Okay, so that's passive. The next one is aggressive. So describe for me aggressive behaviors or aggressive leadership.
Just not hearing anyone else's point of view, just thinking this is my point of view and it's the right one and it's the only one.
Yep, absolutely.
The tone of voice?
Yes. Describe the tone of voice for that would be aggressive.
I said the tone of voice.
Yes, that's right.
Not really. Tone of voice and body language sometimes.
Yeah, very, overpowering body language, domineering body language, looking down on someone and pointing the finger, or, the hand gestures can be very aggressive, and not just the tone of voice, but the level at which you're talking, right? How loud you get. So it's not just what you say, as you all know, it's how you say it has a bigger impact on the message that you're delivering. So what else speaks to aggressiveness? I think
it's almost like giving other people orders instead of being a team and making decisions and things work all together. You're like pointing fingers, or
you're blaming and accusing others, or demanding and ordering, as opposed to having a dialogue with the team to come to a conclusion. It's not always about consensus, but it is about, as you said, Manon, bringing people together to understand one another and to get input, and then you can go and make a firm decision, right? And we're going to talk about that balance between sort of assertion, being assertive, and not taking too much time to understand everybody's perspective and always making sure everybody's on side. It's a balance that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So the aggressive, so with the passive, the underlying belief, as I mentioned, is you're okay, I'm not okay. Your needs are much more important than my needs. Your opinion and your beliefs are much more of value than mine. Okay, that's the underlying beliefs of somebody who behaves passively. The underlying belief of somebody who behaves aggressively is, I'm okay, you're not okay. My needs are more important than your needs. My beliefs are more important than your beliefs. My opinion and my decisions and my way is the final say and way more important than anything you could have to say. Okay? That's the underlying belief and tone of somebody who behaves aggressively. Okay, so concerned for their needs at the expense of others. Loses their temper, may shout or be, use bullying techniques to get their way. Also may have a hard time letting it go. Will continue the argument. Will hold on to that, right? They can get angry and then, this is sort of bullying, the names, etc. May openly criticize and find fault. So approaches disagreement not from a factual perspective or an open, respectful perspective, but from a criticism. There's a difference between criticizing somebody's ideas and putting them down for them versus being constructive and showing other, understanding perhaps why that might not be a good idea that they shared or why you don't agree with it. Blaming others, accusing others, demanding and ordering. Okay. Any questions around aggressive behavior?
No.
And then there's assertive behavior, which we talked a little bit about. So the underlying belief of assertiveness is, I'm okay, you're okay. My needs and wants aren't any more important than your needs and wants. We may have differing opinions. Let's talk openly and respectfully with one another through dialogue. And at the end of the day, as the leader, I'm going to make a decision that I'm going to stand firm on based on information that I've gathered, based on our goals and priorities. However, as I make that decision, I'm going to hear you and be open to your opinions. So being assertive isn't about not making difficult decisions and being firm. It's about absolutely doing that, but the way in which we get there requires openness and dialogue so that at the end of the day, when we do stand firm and make difficult decisions, that we have support for those decisions along the way. And when we do the webinar, it's not the next one, it's the one after, on leading change. A big piece of leading change is on decision making, okay? And you're going to be gaining a process for leading individuals through a decision making process where ultimately they support a decision that you are making or the organization has made, even if they don't agree with it, okay? So you're going to be gaining a process and a tool for that. So assertiveness is about being able to express yourself with others, being able to ask for help when you need it, saying no to, added tasks or workload that's being, dropped on you that you honestly feel you cannot do in the timeline that's being presented, and working with that individual to, to find a compromise, finding solutions, and addressing concerns. So we're going to look at some strategies for leading more assertively so that these behaviors and practices can show up more effectively as you lead others. Okay, so overall, let's just review the passive, aggressive, assertive, right? So passive individual, do I win? No. When I behave passively all the time, I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting what I need. Right? Others, quote unquote, are winning and getting what they need all of the time versus me. And so how does that, is a passive individual experiencing more or less stress than an assertive individual?
Probably more.
And yeah, I would agree with you. And why would do you think they experience more?
Well, because they should be able to see that things are not getting done, that they're not getting their respect, that they're not meeting their goals, and that would personally stress me out.
Right. So you're taking on, maybe taking on too much. You're feeling a lack of confidence and frustrated because you're not speaking up and thinking after the fact, oh, I should have said that if I had only done that. Passive individuals tend to beat themselves up a lot in their minds after the fact. And so, yes, they do experience more stress than an individual who's more assertive. Okay? So as an example, right, if a passive individual, when they're being asked to take on another project that they just absolutely don't have the time to do, they'll take it on without expressing any concern or asking for more time or asking to move it, to next month or to put it on hold or what have you. So they will take it on without expressing any concern over it, okay? The aggressive individual they will just say no. There's no way I'm doing this. I don't have the time to do it. I'm exhausted, and you keep bringing me stuff that I can't do, right? So they'll react, okay, and they'll react aggressively. And it may be a trigger. So an aggressive person may not always be aggressive, right? The aggression may be triggered by stress or feeling out of control, and then you react in an aggressive way. Okay, so it's not always being aggressive or always being passive. Some of us, or all of us, have our triggers and have a tendency when we're triggered to either go to a passive or aggressive or assertive more often. Okay, assertiveness is a choice. It's a response. Passiveness and aggressiveness are reactions to feelings of low self-esteem, of lack of confidence, of fear, of frustration, of stress, and their reactions. When we respond assertively, we may still feel angry or scared or upset, but we're choosing not to allow those emotions to dictate how we respond in the moment. Okay, so for example, when we're in a meeting with more senior people who may be intimidating based on their behavior or their role within the organization, that may make someone feel uncomfortable and nervous, and those feelings of nervousness and discomfort will prevent them from asking questions or speaking their opinion or speaking their mind. Somebody who is assertive would not allow those feelings of discomfort and unease to prevent them from speaking up. They would choose to ask a question instead if they had a question to ask, because they are more aware of the need to do that and are self-aware of the feelings that are preventing them to doing the right thing that they need to do from themselves in that moment. Did that make sense, or
Yeah.
the response versus the reaction?
Yeah.
So the assertive person, when somebody hands them yet another project and they're feeling frustrated and angry that, man, I can't keep doing this, instead of so it's a fight or flight response, right? The passive person will flee and just take it on and not address it, and then stress will build up and it'll be more of an internal struggle. The aggressive person has the fight response, right? And will say, I can't handle this anymore. The assertive person doesn't allow those feelings of fight or flight to take over and will simply have a conversation about it. Okay, and will say, and they may not do it in the moment. They may take the project, think about it, go back and say, you know what, I've looked at my workload. I'd like to talk to you about how we can manage this project, because given these other 3 things that I have due around the same time, something's going to have to give. So maybe we can work together to figure that out. So can we work together to figure that out? Okay. So the parent-adult-child model is what we referred to in our session together in the spring. And so Sylvie, for for everybody's review, this really relates to aggressive, passive, and assertive, right? So in any given situation, we will respond in one of three ways. We will respond in the parent mode, which is a more aggressive, my way or the highway. No, we're not doing that. There's no dialogue. There's no understanding of other people's perspectives. It may not be an angry, bullying or yelling situation, but it's a very rigid reaction, right? There's no wiggle room there, no room for having a conversation about it. Stern, short, impatient. We call it, the parent hands on the hips mode, I'm always right. Then there's the child mode, which is the more passive mode, and it can be, sort of the victim, the poor me mode. This is also sort of a passive aggressive. We didn't talk about passive aggressive. I didn't put it in here, but passive aggressiveness is somebody who in a meeting will pay lip service to something and agree to something and then leave and complain about it very vocally, right? So in front of a group, they will be passive and won't rock the boat, but outside of a meeting, one-on-one with other people, they'll just be very negative. Okay, so that's passive aggressive. When we react in the parent, we are likely to bring out the child in somebody else. Okay, because they'll retreat yeah, you're more likely to bring out the child. When we react in the child, we are more likely to bring out the parent in another individual. So think about, for example, somebody who's always coming into your office complaining, right? There's a lot of negativity or a lot of whining and complaining about things. Eventually, that's going to trigger, and that will either trigger the parent in the leader, right? Or, it most likely triggers the parent. Or it could trigger the child. Sometimes it triggers the child in the leader, and the leader says, well, that's not my fault. I have nothing to do with it. You're complaining. You need to deal with it yourself. Okay? So we trigger responses when we react in the child or react in the parent. We will trigger unproductive reactions in other people. When we respond in the adult, we're responding assertively, where we're choosing not to allow our emotions to dictate how we show up. Okay? So when we're in the adult mode or when we are responding assertively, we are not, what do I mean when I say we see people as they are?
You don't want to change them?
You're not trying to change them? Okay, good. That's a good example. So using the person who has come into you a lot of the time being negative, right? We just naturally and unconsciously apply all of our past experiences with that person to this interaction that we're about to have. And that affects how we react to that person because we have assumptions about them and we're labeling them. This person's always negative. This person's never going to change. I can't handle this person anymore. And then that impacts how we communicate with that person. And so by seeing people as they are, it's, again, consciously choosing to communicate openly, respectfully, to understand, to find the best solution at the end of the day. Okay, so asking for information, not making assumptions, not applying all the past baggage to them in that moment, okay, which is difficult to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do. And talking to each other with respect as equals and creating dialogue. Okay, so that's really what assertiveness is about. And the more we can respond openly in the adult mode with assertion, the less likely you're going to receive a child reaction back or a parent reaction back. Okay, so at the end of the day, being assertive means expressing your thoughts, your opinions, your feelings, attitudes, and rights in an open and honest way. Okay, when you're assertive, you stand up for yourself while still respecting others. At work, assertiveness involves balancing getting what you need with being respectful of the needs and rights of your coworkers, subordinates, and supervisors. So how would you, what does that statement, that definition of assertiveness mean to you?
I guess the biggest word in those phrases is respect. If you respect your employee, they will respect you.
Absolutely. What else stands out for you?
Well, I guess expressing your thoughts and your opinions, like in an honest way, is going to be easier with the team around you.
And what do you mean by with the team around you?
Well, with your coworkers, for example, if you're giving your opinions and your feelings and you're honest, then it's going to be better than, unless you don't want to, like, compare to the passive person where they're not going to explain themselves or give their opinions.
Right. So when you as a leader with your team demonstrate that it's okay to express opinion, right, in a respectful way. So this is also about role modeling. So when you say when you have your team around you and to be able to do this with your team, you're showing them that it's okay to do that as well. One of the signs of a very healthy, high-performing team is the ability for team members to come together and have these healthy, honest discussions so that we can work through them together. And next week, you're going to have learn about. We're going to review coaching and some coaching techniques to work through some of these things and being honest in expressing your thoughts around performance management and providing feedback. Okay, that's really important as well in leading and building high-performing teams. Okay, and yes, it always comes back to respect and finding that balance between getting what you and the organization needs and ensuring that your team members get what they need as well. And we talked about the importance of body language when we communicate assertively, right? So 93% of the way in which we communicate, the impact of that is through our voice and our body language. Okay, so when we're communicating, 93% of the message is received through our tone of voice and our body language and not the words we're using. So that's huge. So being mindful of our tone of voice and the way in which we present ourselves through our body language is key. So I want to touch for a minute about this balance between assertiveness, passiveness, and aggressiveness. And it's really a dance for a leader. The best leaders, okay, are able to find a balance between what I call vulnerability and invincibility, okay? And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference. So tell me for a little bit, when you think of vulnerability, showing vulnerability as a leader, what does that mean? What does it mean to be vulnerable and to show vulnerability?
Weakness.
To show weakness?
Yeah.
Okay, and what does that mean? Can you give me an example?
Well, if you're vulnerable, usually you're not up to par, so you might be more weak to decide or to make decisions, to move forward with something if you're vulnerable.
Okay, so if you are too vulnerable, you may be perceived as weak?
Yep.
Okay, So tell me about, yes, absolutely. If we operate from the vulnerability mode too much, we're going to be perceived as weak, and that's where I'm sort of getting at it, absolutely. What are the positive sides? Maybe I phrased it incorrectly. What are the positive aspects of vulnerability?
Not usually seen as a positive.
But the best leaders are able to show vulnerability. So let's spend some time thinking about what that means. So how can vulnerability be a positive thing?
You may be a little bit more open to discussions, suggestions, ideas if you're vulnerable.
Okay, good. Open to suggestions, ideas. Absolutely. Good, good. What else? What else shows vulnerability that's positive?
The openness to change your mind.
I like that. Openness to change your mind. Yes. And how does that come as vulnerability? So when I hear that, it means, okay, I've made a decision, and you know what? I've heard some feedback, and you're right. We need to change course. Right? Feeling comfortable enough to say, you know what, I made a bad call there. I didn't have enough information, and I'm okay with changing course and acknowledging that. Showing vulnerability is about acknowledging mistakes and sharing learning from them with your team. Okay, what else? How else can you show vulnerability in a positive way?
Admitting that you have some weakness.
Yeah, admitting that you know your where you need to develop, know your weaknesses.
Knowing your limitations.
Yes, knowing your limitations. Vulnerability is also about being comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, or I don't know how to solve that. But speaking of being assertive but communicating that in an assertive way, and saying, you're right, I actually, you know what, I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I'll find it out for you. And being comfortable saying, I don't know. And I think I shared this story about the Dalai Lama. I'll share it again, where I was at a conference, actually it was Health Achieve Conference, and there was a speaker talking about his experience being on stage with the Dalai Lama, and there was, you know, a Q&A at the end, and somebody asked the Dalai Lama a question, and he said, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. You're probably better equipped to answer that question than I am. And he thought, if the Dalai Lama can say, I don't know, surely I can say I don't know. And so just being comfortable and showing that at times you don't always have those answers. You know, as leaders, and this is where coaching comes in, when our team members come to us with problems, we feel the responsibility of having to solve it all because we're the leader and we should have all the answers and should be able to solve it. But the best leaders recognize that they don't have all the answers, nor should they, and instead work with the team and the individuals to work together to find the answers. Okay. Now, tell me a little bit about in the invincibility piece. Okay, what are the positive aspects of being of invincibility? What does that look like?
The confidence.
Confidence, yes.
Strongness.
Yep, standing very firm in your decisions.
Authority. Leadership.
Authority, yep. Leadership. Invincibility, what else? Being invincible.
that you can, like, let's say you don't have the answer, but you can find the answer, like you can find the solutions?
Yeah, finding the solutions. I know it. I can do it. No problem. I'll find it for you.
See that as being a winner?
Yeah, being a winner, having that mindset. I'm a winner. I know I can do this. I'm always going to succeed no matter what. People who operate from the invincibility realm tend to be more risk takers. Okay, tend to believe and know they are right. Okay, have that confidence that I can achieve anything that I set my mind to do. Okay, make difficult decisions quickly. Okay, so I want to share these two sides. They're two sides of the same coin, and I want to share them with you because they speak directly to being assertive and your team members' perception of you. So going back to Manon's point at the beginning around when we're vulnerable, we may be perceived as weak. We will be perceived as weak if we're always operating from the vulnerability side of the coin. If we're always saying, oh, I don't know, if in the way in which we say it, oh, I don't know, versus I don't know, actually, I'll find the answer to that for you, right? If we're always asking questions, if we're always asking for help, if we're always choosing to coach versus direct, okay, and inform. If we're always talking about or sharing our weaknesses, right? Then if we're operating from the vulnerability realm too much, if that's our go-to, then we're going to be perceived as passive and weak. On the flip side, if we're always operating from the invincibility realm, how will we be perceived?
Aggressive?
Potentially as aggressive.
Arrogant?
Arrogant, absolutely. As cold, as uncaring. Okay? But both invincibility and vulnerability are essential to exceptional leadership. And when we have a balance of the two, when we start in vulnerability, let's say when we're making decisions and saying, you know what do you think? I don't have all the answers. What do you think? And you know what, I need help here because that's not my strong suit, and I know you're really good at that, so can you help me with this project? And then we can also step into the invincibility field and then make firm decisions and take risks when needed and show confidence in the way we make decisions. When there's a balance of the two, then we're seen as assertive as opposed to arrogant or aggressive or weak and passive. So do you see that balance there?
Yep.
And it's easy for some to get to operate from one or the other. And when we talk about leading self is about being conscious of the behaviors and practices we're choosing every day to demonstrate, and also conscious of how others may perceive us. And so keeping in mind that vulnerability, invincibility dance, some of us aren't as comfortable maybe operating in invincibility. And so how can I bring in more invincibility in my day to get a better balance? Some of us are less comfortable showing vulnerability, especially in organizations where, the leaders have to have all the answers. So I equate this often to physicians. Physicians have a very difficult time showing vulnerability because of their job, their role. But when physicians operate from invincibility too much, their patients will perceive them as arrogant, and their patients won't feel comfortable asking questions, let alone, the nurses or midwives or whoever else, right? So having both, having a balance is essential. And knowing when to demonstrate invincibility and knowing when to demonstrate vulnerability is also key. Okay, any questions around that?
No.
Okay. So I'd like you to pull out, I think Tina left copies of the assertiveness quiz for you.
Yes.
Okay. So There are a number of questions, and I'd like you to just take some time on your own to read through. Actually, I'll go through each of them with you, and you can score them. So you're going to score each question, on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 means I always demonstrate this, or I always feel this, and 1 is I never feel this. Okay, so that's the scale, 1 to 5. So the first question, I ask others to do things without feeling guilty or anxious. So 5 means that this always applies, and 1, this never applies. When someone asks me to do something I don't want to do, I say no without feeling guilty or anxious. Actually, you know what? I'll let you go through this quietly so that you can take your time doing it as opposed to listening to me talk. So once you're done, then you calculate, okay, calculate your total.
I have a question, Nicole.
Sure.
The phrase that says, I assume that most people are competent and trustworthy and do not have difficulty delegating tasks to others. You mean superiors, employees?
Yeah, you know what? I had an issue with that question, actually. This is somebody else's quiz. I had the same question because from my perspective, whether I assume people are competent or not, well, actually, yeah, so it means your team. So I would take out, I assume that most people are competent and trustworthy, and just take out, I don't have, and just answer the question, I don't have difficulty delegating tasks to others.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
Yes. Okay,
yeah. So let me know when you're all done.
CFO is adding the numbers.
Making stats and graphs.
We could be. Wait, all done.
We're all done.
All done. Are you open to sharing your scores?
Well, let's read first what it says in the back.
Yeah. Okay. So, assertiveness, and this isn't, this quiz isn't something that's been, I don't know if it's how tested it is, but I thought it gave us at least a good sense of how comfortable you feel in doing certain things. So, if your total is 60 or higher, you have a consistently assertive philosophy and probably handle most situations well. If your total is 45 to 60, you have a fairly assertive outlook. There are some situations in which you may be naturally assertive, but you should be able to increase your assertiveness through practice. 30 to 45, you seem to be assertive in some situations, but your natural response is either non-assertive or aggressive. So those two would be the go-to, one or the other. You may want to change some perceptions and practice new behaviors in order to handle things much more assertively. And if your total is 15 to 30, there's considerable difficulty being assertive. Need to practice and allow yourself time to grow and change. Okay. I used to teach an assertiveness class at George Brown College here in Toronto. And most people who came to the class had very, low confidence, lower self-esteem, and weren't able to really move up in their organization because of that. And assertiveness is something that can absolutely be learned. And by the end of it was half of a year. So by the end of the first term, they were all demonstrating much more assertive practices and behaviors. So when we're talking about strengthening our assertiveness, it's an inner game and an outer game. And what do I mean by an inner game?
Well, it needs to come from us, within us.
Needs to come from within you. An inner game, it absolutely does need to come from within you. And what I mean by that is when we lack confidence or self-esteem to speak up, to ask questions, to voice our opinions, to deal with conflict, the inner game is always, we're usually telling ourselves something negative about ourselves or about our abilities or about what other people will think of us if we speak up. So by inner game in strengthening your assertiveness, I mean being very aware of what you're telling yourself in the moment. If you're recognizing that you're being passive, or you're recognizing that you're avoiding a situation, or not speaking up, or feeling uncomfortable about speaking up, stop and ask yourself, what are you think about what you're telling yourself in that moment, and start being more productive with your thoughts and changing what you're telling yourself to be more positive, and saying, well, I may be nervous about speaking up, but I really have this question. What's the worst that could happen? I'm going to ask it. So by inner game, it's just being very aware about how your thoughts are impacting the way in which you react, because they have a lot of control over you. And instead of allowing your thoughts to control you, turn that around and you should be controlling your thoughts. Okay? So that's what I mean by inner game. And outer game is just about practicing using different tones of voice, different body language, practice speaking up and asking more questions, for example. So it is about behavior at the end of the day, and that's what I mean by outer game. So it's both inner and outer. Are there individuals in the room where you feel you could strengthen your assertiveness?
Well, I think
Yes.
I could, yeah.
Yes, with that quiz, what I like is you can see your weak points.
Right.
Yeah, I can see for me, delegation is an issue.
And what do you think is preventing you? Why is it an issue for you?
Because I like to do my own things. I don't like other people to do it. And for me, my saying, and I know it's probably not the right one, but you know, you can never do something. Something is never done well unless it's done by me, like myself.
Right.
Like, you know.
And so, yeah, and I understand that. I'm the same way. I'm very controlling in the way things are done. Right. It's constant work for me. It's an inner process to let that go. So I understand that. How does that? So that's an example of not necessarily outward parent behavior, but more inward parent behavior as far as controlling things and not trusting others to be able to do it as well as you. And so when we don't delegate and take more control, what is the impact on your team?
They'll just keep bringing you the things to do because they know you'll just do them.
Right.
And they won't take ownership of what, you know, that they should be doing it.
Absolutely. What else? They might feel that you don't trust them to do it.
I find sometimes it's just that they don't know how, and I just don't want to take the time to show them.
Sure, absolutely. And so how does that relate to then building better teamwork?
Well, I need to get them to participate in orders because I'm also part of the team. It's not just them. I'm also part of the team. So if I would take the time and trust them more and give them things to do, then they would feel more motivated. They would respect me. They would be more engaged, and it would be more teamwork.
Absolutely.
I have a funny story actually that happened yesterday. One of my nurses went to visit somebody in a different hospital, a larger hospital, and she took a few pictures of some of the things they have there, and like the whiteboards for the rooms. And I told her we were planning on buying some, and she was showing me they have something that's called a pat on the back. So if the nurses get cards or thank you cards or stuff, they have a place to put it. It's decorated nicely and stuff. I said, she said, that's a good idea. I said, yes, it is. You want to work on it? And you should have seen her face. Well, there were 2 or 3 of them, and they all looked, what? Us do it? Yeah, why not? It's your floor.
I find sometimes, too, they don't want to take anything on.
No.
That's how I feel.
But it was just funny, their reaction. It was like, what? I said, actually, I'm going to go to the dollar store and get some arts and crafts stuff. And they were like,
there was no volunteers, to take it on.
No, but it's going to be her project.
Okay, and so that's a great example. And then I heard, Manon, you said sometimes you feel that they don't want to take it on. And so it comes back to something that we're going to be doing in a little bit. And I know we only have 15 minutes left, so I'll get to it in a second. But around clarifying your expectations and defining what teamwork means for us as a team and sharing leadership. So when we look at the elements of a high-performance team, sharing leadership is one of them, and sharing responsibility for things that need to get done without overwhelming each other and recognizing that, for example, the nurse's main priority is the patients at the end of the day. And so there needs to be a balance there. But there needs to does need to be shared leadership for the work that gets done. But before we get to that, I'd like you, just in your groups, there's not a whole lot of you there, in one group, just identify ways that you can demonstrate, based on what you've learned already, what are some things that you can do more regularly to demonstrate assertiveness, based on what you've learned and based on your own situation and where you're at with assertiveness. So just talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll capture a couple of things.
Ben, je pense que le délégué tranquillement, ça...
Oui, délégué. Moi, je vois ça tout le temps comme je donne un test à quelqu'un.
Ouais.
Je lui demande de faire quelque chose. Si la personne est capable de le faire ou non. Je
Puis je trouve que quand tu fais ça, moi, de plus en plus, j'en fais, je les délègue, puis ils prennent plus contrôle sur eux autres, sur une question beaucoup moins depuis ce temps-là, parce qu'ils sont plus certains. C'est sûr que je les vérifie après. Des fois, ils me demandent de le vérifier, ou des fois, non, je vois moi-même le background sans qu'ils s'en rendent compte, puis comme, c'est sûr que des fois, c'est des affaires qui sont pas faites comme qu'on les veut, mais je me dis, on a le même résultat.
Ouais, comme je vois souvent, comme, ils viennent, ah ben, toi, fais-les, Steven.
Ouais.
Toi, tu sais comment le faire.
Ah ouais, mais...
Toi, appelle-les. Elle fait ci, fais ça.
Ben, moi, à ce temps, des fois, ils viennent me voir, ben là, tu peux-tu me montrer comment le faire? Je vais le faire. C'est comme...
Ouais, c'est ça, je vais dire. Essaye-toi.
Dès que tu bloques, tu fais des questions, c'est ça. Après ça, ben... Puis à un moment donné, là, quand on faisait faire des stats à l'urgence, ils allaient dans des dossiers, là, puis il y en avait des bonnes qui faisaient des tableaux, des Excel, spreadsheets, tout ça, là. C'est bon.
Toujours les mêmes.
Toujours les mêmes. Mais c'est parce que, tu sais, quand on dit qu'il faut mettre les bonnes personnes aux bonnes places, ben les autres sont peut-être pas bons là-dedans, ils vont perdre du temps. Là. Tu sais quoi qu'ils pensent.
Mais tu ne peux pas toujours taxer les mêmes personnes.
Non. Mais ils sont disponibles. S'ils disent,
ils prennent ta name aussi.
Oui, mais c'est sûr qu'il ne faut pas que tu les rendes trop, mais
c'est pas fair aussi. Ils disent pourquoi c'est pas les autres.
Ben moi aussi, c'est toujours une des mêmes qui fait plus que toutes les autres. Parce que ça dépend, c'est sur quoi.
La plus de compétences.
Oui, c'est ça, dans ces affaires-là. Fait que les autres, j'enlève un petit peu de elle pour donner aux autres, tu sais. Puis les autres sont corrects avec ça. Là. Puis souvent, c'est eux qui me le suggèrent.
Okay, so I'm just going to step in. Would you share with me one or two ways that you've identified that you can demonstrate more assertiveness going forward?
Well, we were mostly talking about delegation. That was a topic mainly.
Yeah.
Okay. And
can it be a way to demonstrate a certain assertiveness? We delegate, and then we were just saying, you know, how it's difficult, and then some people are okay with it, some are not, and like Sylvie was saying, you know, it doesn't matter how they do it as long as they get to the same result as you would.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, that's a good conversation. Okay, well, let's get back to that because we're going to get back to that in a minute. Just want to get to a few tips first, and then we're going to get to a sort of a team strategy. That could include delegation and clarifying expectations around that. So some tips to lead with assertion is to present a more assertive approach or communication is you use more I statements, right? I believe this, I need this, I feel this way, I understand this. So what's the benefit of using I statements?
You're owning what you're saying.
That's absolutely right. You're owning what you're saying, and you have the confidence to own it. Okay, that's a big piece of communicating assertively. Okay. And next week when we do the feedback workshop or webinar, we'll be coming back to I statements as well. Also develop a comfort with saying no and practice saying no when appropriate, right? So I think we used that example earlier on. If you're already feeling overwhelmed and you get handed another project, instead of, you know, if a current behavior is just to take it on and then deal with all the internal stress and angst around dealing with that, think about another alternative. How can you have a conversation with your own boss about better juggling or managing priorities? Okay, so again, it's clarifying expectations back and communicating your needs, not in a complaining way or in a negative way, in a very open, factual way, right?
Nicole, how are we supposed to, when the organization gets into projects or they're already engaged into the projects and they come up to us and ask us, well, not ask us, well, like most of the time, yeah, most of the time it's you don't have the choice to be on that project because it affects your department or whatever.
Sure. And so then it's about having a conversation with your boss and saying, I understand the importance of this project because it affects my team, and I have these other 5 things. And so are there other timelines that can be moved because I'm feeling uncomfortable with the stress level and I don't have anybody to delegate that to? So your first actual thought is, where can I delegate other things? And then second is having a conversation with your boss to manage those expectations and clarify back. And not in a whiny or complaining way. It's simply just stating some facts around workload and what the impact of that is having on the team and yourself. And they may still come back and say, you know what, I understand it, and but right now there is no budging. But at least you're showing that and communicating that it's becoming too much, and showing that you are being assertive with it in a respectful way. So it may not change, and it might. But what is the benefit of speaking up regardless if you feel you need to?
Well, they know where you stand.
They know where you stand.
There's no gray zone.
And you're showing confidence and the ability to speak up. That impacts perception. But again, it's in the way that you do it. Okay, so it's just very sort of factual and having a dialogue about it. And I just want to talk to you about it so we can find a way so that we can work to find a way to better manage this. And they may still come back and say, I know, I understand, but it still needs to happen. But at least you've had a conversation about it. Because when we don't, then it'll just create internal angst and frustration. So speak up more and voice your opinion, ask for what you need, and then now I'm getting to what I really want to talk about over the next 8 minutes. So part of leading with assertion is showing your team that teamwork, healthy climate, the way in which we work together is a priority, and taking ownership of that as a leader and making it a priority. So actively, as the leader, creating a healthy climate and demonstrating that you feel accountable to that, and also building accountability for that within your team. Okay, and so by healthy climate, I mean working with your team to identify what type of experience do we want to have at the end of the day when we come into work and work together to deliver the best care possible or to reach whatever it is the goal that your department has. Okay, so working with your team to define what that climate is. And when we did our research on healthy climate, you know, it was very clear that there are two types of climates. There's the healthy climate, and then there's a cold climate. And in healthy climates, or I should say in cold climates, people leave work at the end of the day feeling deflated and having no energy. And they're deflated not because of the stress of the job or because of the number of patients they were seeing. They're feeling deflated or depleted because team members are depleting energy from one another based on their negativity, based on how they're treating each other, based on that maybe there's a lack of trust or a lack of respect, whether it's within the team or across teams. Okay, so in a healthy climate, it's the complete opposite. In the healthy climate, team members might still feel stressed because of the workload, but their energy isn't being depleted by their team members. So they're still leaving work at the end of the day. They may feel tired because of the job, but they're not feeling down and out and frustrated and disrespected in any way or devalued in any way, right? So they're feeling a part of the team and feeling a positive experience. So as a leader, you show assertiveness by actively leading your team towards that climate and actively creating it. Because we've talked about it before, that the cultures in which we work don't just happen one day. We create them. And being an assertive leader means recognizing those behaviors and practices that need to show up, addressing them when they're not showing up, and praising them when they do. And we're going to get to that next week around feedback and coaching and performance management, okay? But I want to leave you with a strategy right now that you can use with your team in having a conversation and taking action to actively create a healthy climate. And this will help to demonstrate that you are being assertive here, that you're not just okay with the status quo. If teamwork is lacking, that you're not just going to keep letting it lack. You're taking action here and you're being assertive about it. Okay? And this is a strategy that I've talked to a couple of you about in coaching sessions now because there have been some common themes. And so just want to share it back as a group. Okay? So one great activity, and I heard if there was one message that you want to share, I heard ownership and I heard teamwork. And so this is what it can come back to. So at a meeting, at an upcoming meeting, I'd suggest that you bring your team together to focus in on your team's goals and priorities. So at the end of the day, what are we here to do as a team? Okay, as an ER department, as the finance department, as the acute care or health records department, what are we here to do at the end of the day? What is our goal and what are our main priorities? And have a conversation around that. Involve your team members in that so that people are refocused on the raison d'etre, on why we're here. Okay? Then ask your team members to describe the working environment that they want. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Describe it. Okay, and if you can, capture it on a flip chart, right, so that it's visual. What is it that we want to experience every day as we work together to achieve that goal and deliver the best care possible? Okay. Also, you know, part of our goals is maybe, you know, servicing other areas of the organization and providing the best service possible. And what does that look like, right? But describing the type of work environment that they want. So they've described that sort of future state, you know, the ideal work environment where they will feel great and the patient will feel great or the clients at the end of the day feel great. And then ask, okay, so what are the behaviors and practices that we need to demonstrate and take ownership for every day in order to create that environment? And stress as the leader, you know, you can share back and say exactly what I said. The culture doesn't just happen one day. We create it. So what do we need to do to create the culture that we want? And capture those behaviors and practices on a flip chart. And then you can develop team agreements. And I'm going to give you an example of team agreements. So you might find that, you know, taking ownership or solving problems ourselves might come out. If it's not there and, Stephen, you feel it needs to be there, then you can add it and say, I'd also like to suggest that we take more ownership for issues before coming to other people with them, okay? But at the end of the day, you're going to have a list of behaviors and practices that your team members are going to agree to. And you can use this as a way to guide and provide feedback to your team, okay? So when you see a behavior showing up that is contrary to what they're agreeing to, right? Maybe people are starting to be negative again. You can then provide feedback. You know, remember last month we agreed that we'd take a more positive attitude because we want to, you know, create the best environment possible. I'm noticing over the past week, you know, this and this and this that really speaks to a negative attitude. Let's talk about it, and then you can have a coaching conversation, a 5-minute coaching conversation, which we're going to be talking about next week. So team agreements give you a way to provide feedback and to actively lead your team in living the behaviors and practices that they identify as being essential. And the process of developing these builds accountability because it's their behaviors. They're identifying these as being needed, so they're going to take greater ownership. So these are just an example of another client's team agreements. It's actually a physiotherapy team at Credit Valley Hospital here who developed these.
So this slide you posted on the site, right, Nicole?
Yeah, so this will go on the website. Okay. And I'm going to come back to team agreements next week again at our next call so that we can talk more about how you use them. Okay, so the first step is developing them. But team agreements are only going to work if you use them. They're not going to work if you just did it at a meeting, put it in a notebook, or post it on the wall and never use them and refer to them and have a conversation about them again. Okay, team agreements, we've been using in my organization team agreements for 30 years with our clients. and they work to change behavior very quickly when they're used well. Okay, so we're going to talk next week about how to use them. Okay.
Nicole?
Yes.
Excuse me, there's another meeting at 11:30 in the boardroom.
In this room. Okay, we're done. We're done. So, sorry. That was great. Okay, so I will let you go. As homework, what I'd love you to do is to apply. You identified delegation. If there's one other thing that you can do to lead more assertively, I'd like you to think about that. And then next week, we're going to review feedback, coaching, and team agreements and performance management.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too. Take care.